Mrs. Wilson coldly snorted, "If I don't pay the money, I will be taken to jail. Don't forget that I am a legal person in the company and I am responsible for the company's debts." Noah hurriedly said, "Then you should at least take out 1 or 200,000, let's take a breath. I am living now, and I can't even smoke a pack of cigarettes for 50. Do you still smoke?" Old Mrs. Wilson said sharply, "It would be nice to have a bite of food, and still want to smoke?" Noah held the fire in his heart, but sighed in his mouth. "Mom, I am old, so I can bear it, but Harold and Wendy are still young. They have not suffered much, so I can't wrong them." Old Mrs. Wilson coldly snorted, "Then I don't care, the more I have to cut down on food and clothing, and tide over difficulties together at this time." As soon as these words came out, Harold and Wendy immediately became dissatisfied. The two of them were spoiled and coddled and couldn't endure any hardship. Since Horiah ran away with money, their lives have been very hard during this period of time. However, now that Mrs. Wilson is rich, she doesn't want to open the warehouse and put grain, instead she wants everyone to cut down on food and clothing. Isn't this killing them? Immediately, Harold said, "Grandma, it's easy for you to say it. When you are old, eating less and drinking less, it's no problem for you to eat less, but how can my sister and I be like this? We can't eat this. It's kind of bitter, I'm not good at eating and drinking these days, and I've lost a few kilos of weight." "Yes, Grandma," Wendy said with no air, "the cosmetics I used before were thousands or tens of thousands. Now I can only use the most common L'Oreal. Seeing that this L'Oreal is almost running out, I don't even have money to buy it. Grandma, do you still want me to spend some bucks on the sod honey?" After she finished speaking, she immediately said, "I don't care. Grandma, you have to give me 20,000 today. I will buy a set of Aquamarine Mystery, otherwise my face will be completely ruined." Mrs. Wilson coldly snorted, "Poor scream. The mystery of the sea blue? Is the sod honey sorry for you? Useless things, you even couldn't grasp Fredman. If you could hold Fredman in the first place, our family will be as good as today." Wendy suddenly became anxious and blurted out, "What does this have to do with me?" It was Fredman who was made incompetent by Charlie. Before he became incompetent, I coaxed him well. Don't forget that he gave me 5 millions, tens of millions to the Wilson family. So what? Old Mrs. Wilson said coldly, "He hasn't left yet? If you really have that ability, even if he becomes incompetent, he will stay. After all, you can't do it." Noah was still holding the fire, but when the Lady Wilson said this about his daughter Wendy, he felt a little angry and blurted out, "Mom, Wendy and Fredman have also listened to your instructions. How can you get into trouble at this time? Cross the river and demolish the bridge?" Old Mrs. Wilson coldly snorted, "I crossed the river and demolished the bridge? Did I cross the river? Obviously the bridge disappeared before halfway through, causing me to fall into the water and almost drowned me." Noah said annoyedly, "Mom, anyway, I just said that I can't pay the money back to the bank. I have to spend 200,000 to improve my life if I say anything. Otherwise, you can sell all Dad's antiques for some money. Otherwise you can hide those things and you won't be able to take them away in the future. You curse me to death?" The old Mrs. Wilson suddenly became angry, and said coldly, "You three want to shake the sky, don't you?" Old Mrs. Wilson's voice changed, sharp and scary. She didn't expect that Noah, who had always been flattering and obedient to her, dared to slap her on her nose, and even dared to speak harsh words to her. At this moment, she also deeply realized that her eldest son, grandson, and granddaughter were not really following her in a desperate manner. They are just 3 parasites attached to her, all the time thinking about opening their mouths to draw nutrients from her body. The more this happens, the more she has to keep her money and things under control, and must not let the 3 of them succeed. After the old Mrs. Wilson and Noah renounced their morality, an unhealable crack occurred in each other's hearts. In the end, the Lady Wilson only used 50,000 as the living expenses of the family of 4, and the rest was all returned to the 2 banks that owed money. After the bank received this part of the repayment, the person in charge of the collection department also gave the old Mrs. Wilson a lot of face, saying that the debt could be extended appropriately to give the Wilson family a chance to breathe. The old Mrs. Wilson finally breathed a sigh of relief. She is still counting on the Wilson Group to come back to life. As long as the bankruptcy can be delayed, she may have a chance. Maybe when the next Fredman will come out. For her, the Wilson family is currently facing great difficulties, but in the final analysis, it is only a problem of tens of millions. If she really encounter a big boss like Fredman with a worth of tens of billions, the other party will casually leak from fingers. A little money was enough to bring the Wilson family back to life. Compared with the old Mrs. Wilson, who is full of longing and anticipation, Noah is very depressed. The lady only got $50,000 for the furniture, and the $50,000 was still in her own hands. Noah was going to be exhausted, and he was so empty that he could not even afford a pack of cigarettes. That night, the Lady Wilson only took 20 to buy vegetables, and she bought a bunch of rotten cabbage and half a kilogram of pork. Noah felt dry and uncomfortable, but there was no other way. He could only endure it in his heart, and at the same time racked his brains to study where the Lady Wilson would hide the antique left by the old master. Just as the Wilson family complained about the poor life of clear soup and water, Claire's family had already begun to move to the Thompson villa early the next morning.